Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing? I guess before I start, to say grateful to be here in the Veterans Building. My father was a 28-year veteran. Uncle Sam requested his presence during World War II, and he got out for a while and got back in. Was in the first MASH outfit in Korea, which I found out at his funeral, because those guys didn't talk about anything. But it's good to be here. I'm a product of Uncle Sam. The other thing I wanted to say is that Frank promised I would give you the most depressing lecture that you've ever heard. So I think I need to get a new agent. Maybe you should seriously consider getting another marketing person, Frank. Okay. So anyway, here we go. So we're going to look at what we're calling, I don't know. Oh, hello. I hope you got your code scanned. I don't know, we call this the woke revolution. It's a term that has been used by people both for and against. My son says maybe social justice revolution is more appropriate, but in any event, we spent this morning looking at two previous revolutions, in part because I think we're going to see that there are some similarities. I hope tonight when you go to sleep, before you go asleep, this slide will appear before you, that it will be burned into your brain and you'll dream about it tonight. But we're seeing a lot of the same stuff, right? And I'm not going to talk anymore about this slide because I've talked about it a lot already, but we'll see how it plays out during what we're calling the woke revolution. All right, so you guys are all familiar with these terms. It's everywhere now: diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you recall, the French Revolution was based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. These are the highest ideals of Enlightenment rationalism. The Russian Revolution, the slogan was peace, land, and bread. These were materialist ideals. And now we live in the age of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It appears that there is a mandatory law of three here. I don't know where that comes from, but the question is, what is the philosophical basis for this new vision? And a lot of people are telling you this is just more Marxism, but actually I don't believe that. And if you look at the people, we're going to look at some of the people that are promoting this now, and that's not where they're drawing their inspiration from. Actually, I will argue, as Frank said earlier, this comes from postmodern critical theory, and it's based on postmodernism. Short story is, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the race and gender theorists at the academy, at the universities, they had previously been focused, they were Marxist in their critique, and that had been the cutting edge. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they replaced Marxism with what was then an emerging philosophy called postmodernism. And it couldn't be more distinct. I can tell you from my own experience walking through a university bookstore. Before the Soviet Union collapsed, every class in social sciences and humanities and the education department, everybody had Marxist texts. After that happened, there were no more Marxist texts, right? But there was these emerging fields of ethnic studies and women's studies, and they were all being replaced by postmodernism. So here, let me tell you what that is, because it's not widely known. First of all, it is what I call post-atheistic. Okay, most of the slides I'm using today are slides that I didn't make, but they're made by academics who are teaching these ideas. And so it's just a fair representation of what's being taught. This one's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. All truth is relative, of course, except for this statement. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But postmodernism, I call it post-atheistic. You recall that the French Enlightenment thinkers were deists and the Marxists were atheists. Postmodernism doesn't only reject God, but they reject truth itself. And I just want you to think, as we talk about these ideas, you may not know where they're coming from, but they're all through society, and you're going to come across them. But the rejection of truth, the idea of truth, is based on the postmodern theory of deconstruction. I'll tell you a little bit about what that is. We don't need to go into great detail. But deconstruction questions the very idea of fixed meaning, of any fixed meaning. Meaning is always deferred and provisional and ultimately relative. So it's a pure form of relativism, because without a stable sense of meaning, of course, there can be no truth. So it's antagonistic to the very notion of truth. So not only is there no God, there are no universal truths, no religious or philosophical truths, even rationality in science. It's actually critical of the very Enlightenment ideas that we looked at earlier. It is post-Enlightenment as well, right? It's why I say it's not atheist, it's not militantly atheist like Marxism is. Rather, it's actually rather indifferent to the question of God, because Derrida, who was the founder of deconstruction, and this is a little bit about his biography, he was an Algerian who was raised and educated in the French system. He argues that there is no truth without God. It's also true that without truth, there is no God. Right? So they're not even interested in the question. Also, postmodernists believe that truth is a story that we tell ourselves. They call it, you may have heard this term, a meta-narrative. That just means it's a story we tell ourselves about the meaning and goal of life and of history. But postmodernists reject meta-narratives, which, by the way, includes Marx, as we will see. What we understand as truths are actually just an expression of an extension of power. This is a picture, actually, a number of pictures of Michel Foucault, who's the author of this idea. He says, knowledge is produced by the powerful. It serves the purpose of maintaining their privilege and their power. So he refers to this as power knowledge. Knowledge, whatever it is always an expression of power, right? Of course, this also gets at the notion of truth. It's just an expression of power. And he refers to it as power knowledge. You see this when in his stuff all the time. That's the way he writes it. So there's now no power relation without the correlative constitution of a field of knowledge, and nor any knowledge that is not also presuppose and constitute at the same time power relations. I just want to point out, there are some similarities here with Marx, but there's also some profound differences as well. And in fact, it begins with the rejection of Marxism. So this was an academic slide to try to show the difference between the old feudal power relations, which is based on domination, and the forms of struggle, which is important in the postmodernist view of the world, are largely ethnic or religious. In capitalism, of course, it's exploitation, which leads to class struggle. But in this, actually it says modern, but it should say postmodern, the form of power is considered to be subjection, which is, again, a little bit depressing. Okay, I'll own up to that. But that all relationships entail this kind of subjection. And so the response is struggle for identity or resistance. And again, how many times have you heard resist or resistance? This is where it comes from. I'm not going to go too deeply into the theory. It is after lunch. But power for Foucault does come, it's not a top-down thing. It comes from below. And it's just so many multiple strategies that are being deployed. And so it's the key thing is, for Marx, he thought he could get rid of power through the revolution, and that as a result of the revolution, there'd be a classless society and everybody would be free and equal. For Foucault, that's a meta-narrative. It's a dream. It's not possible. Power's everywhere. It's in every relationship, right? It's in your family. It's in your marriage. It's everywhere. Okay, so this is a very relativistic point of view as well, as was Derrida's. Basically, all opinions are equally true, or I would argue also untrue, right? And all beliefs the same. I think most important for us to understand is that Foucault rejects the idea that history has any goal or purpose or direction. Actual history is just a series of events. It may not be entirely random, but it's just what comes next. There is no purpose. In other words, again, pure relativism. There's no purpose in life, there's no purpose in history, and it leads in no particular direction. But it exists in every institution within society. It's nihilistic, in fact. Power is not concentrated, though, in these two classes as Marx would have it. It's more of a grid. I'm going to show you one attempt to try to map out Foucault's power grid. Study this closely. There'll be a quiz later. So power is dispersed throughout society, but not equally. It's not evenly divided. Some have more than others, and it can't be tamed or eliminated, as Marx would have it, but it can be resisted. You hear a lot about resistance. And the only way to fight the power of the privileges is either resist or to fight it with a counterpower, form your own counterpower against it. Again, it's not Marxism. There's lots of points that differ from Marx, but this idea that there's power implies that there's just oppression everywhere and in every relationship. It does have elements that touch on some of Marxist themes. This oppressor and oppressed exists not just in class relationships, but in every relationship.